Hey everyone, in this video I want to go over the second part of chapter 8, evaluating internet resources in a post-truth age. Now, there's a lot of information on these pages and a lot of them focused on specific examples. What I want to do in this PowerPoint is cover some of the patterns that I see and hopefully fill in some of the blanks. So first of all, I just want to discuss, and some of this is clarified in the book, some of it is not. What is a visual argument? What are we talking about here? And why is it important to think about and be able to think critically about visual arguments? So a visual argument relies on imagery through pictures or the visual presentation of words to present its claims. So we're talking about photos, drawings, something that you might see on a website or maybe in a magazine, if you still read those things. Not necessarily videos, though much of what we're saying here about visual arguments could also apply to videos. In some ways, video arguments are, can be even more persuasive and manipulating. A visual argument will often present a clear, direct claim that is supported by assumptions, biases, and suggestions that are only presented visually through symbolism, distortion, or incongruity. Okay, so so if you think about the examples of visual arguments in the book, a lot of them have a very specific goal. There's one that's a recruiting poster for the British Army. Okay, so the very clear, direct claim, which is that you should want to volunteer to serve your country, and it makes this claim through some very suggestive images that call to mind nostalgic ideas about England as a country, that try to create a sense of unity and inclusiveness that emotionally makes you want to join that army, right? If you're actually a British citizen and, those appeals work for you. And, we could think of, you might think of ways that, a visual advertisement for the U.S. Army might, appeal to Americans' sense of patriotism. The idea here is that, that a lot of what makes a visual argument work are things that, we as a viewer don't necessarily take the time to analyze and think about, right? Because our perception of a visual image happens pretty much instantaneously, and our subconscious takes that visual image and breaks it down for us almost instantaneously in terms of figuring out how it affects our emotions, so that we're not even necessarily conscious of how a visual argument might be appealing to those emotions, or might be manipulating, or maybe potentially limiting or directing our perspective of what we're looking at. Okay, so this is why visual arguments can be very effective, very powerful, but also, very manipulative, very misleading. They can sometimes, because they affect us emotionally, they might lead us towards a point of view that, if we had read about the issue, or thought a little more carefully about the issue, that, we might have not have accepted. So visual persuasion strategies, so patterns to take note of. Okay, and this is, again, just focusing on the strategies that are presented in the books. There's a lot of strategies, each of them are tied to specific examples of visual persuasion, and they make an interesting choice of also tying those examples to a poem how a poem uses imagery to do largely the same thing that these visual arguments are doing. These advertisements, posters. There's an editorial cartoon that's given. So it's an interesting connection to make between poetry. The connection between poetry and imagery, or poetry and photography, is often made because poems are very imagistic. They tend to focus on imagery to deliver their points in much the same way a visual argument does. But instead of trying to list all the strategies that are presented, because there's so many of them that would just make this video really boring for you, and also completely redundant, assuming that you're reading the book too. I wanted to just identify some of the patterns that I see in those strategies. So, one of the patterns is this idea that visual arguments will try to direct your attention, right? So not only will it give you a picture, it will also find a way to tell you what to look at in the picture. All right. It will highlight certain aspects of the picture, or it will, the advertisement for the British Army, there's a soldier who's literally pointing at the village that we're supposed to be looking at, that is supposed to, represent this nostalgic idea of old Britain. So visual arguments are, they're trying to direct your attention to something in the frame of the picture. Visual arguments will also present a perspective, and so what I mean by that is not just a perspective in the sense of, it has an opinion, but it's going to try to make you sort of see what you're looking at through a certain perspective. And it could be that perspective is, from a high place looking down, or from a low place looking up. And, if you just think about those perspectives of location, they can have very different impacts of what you're looking at. So the same object, based on whether your perspective is from up high or down low, can make that object seem small in stature, insignificant, or looming and and powerful and imposing. Okay, so with visual arguments, you want to think about, what kind of perspective are we getting here on what we're looking at. Visual arguments will appeal to our emotions, as I mentioned before. That's largely what makes a visual argument so effective. But again, it can also make it very manipulative, because it appeals to our emotions without necessarily being open about how or why it's appealing to our emotions. Visual arguments will often use symbolism. Okay. So images that have a certain symbolic appeal. There's the editorial cartoon. Editorial cartoons often rely completely on symbolism. So this one is of the Syrian war, and actually the Syrian refugee crisis. So people escaping the Syrian war, and the world's kind of muddled attempt to deal with this crisis, and in some cases just sort of refusal to sort of accept and deal with this crisis. And so it presents this symbolically by, presenting Syria as an ocean liner that's literally sinking, and the refugees are the people who are jumping off of the ocean liner. Basically the country, is, it's particularly at the time this cartoon was made, but, it's still some level still is, descending into war, descending into chaos. The country is sinking. These people are just trying to escape. And then there's a smaller boat that represents the rest of the world. And the people on this boat are sort of smugly unwilling to allow these refugees onto their boat. So it's all very symbolic and how it gets its message across. But the symbolism is also very sort of upfront and straightforward and easy to figure out. Sometimes the symbolism, especially if it's, to go back to the example from the British, um, the British Army, the symbolism of sort of the small village, this rustic location, it may not be completely obvious. But, the idea being if, that this is an image that will have a certain emotional appeal to a certain type of British citizen who, who kind of appreciates this nostalgic perspective. Okay, so those are just, again, patterns. There's a lot of different strategies, and when you do the quiz, one of the things the quiz is going to ask you to do is, the main thing the quiz is going to ask you to do is match these strategies, these various strategies that are in the book to specific examples. Okay. The last section, identifying biases you might bring to your research. Okay, so this one I wanted to address the specific strategies that are given. Again, on the quiz, again, you'll have to match these strategies to examples of the strategies. So confirmation bias, this is when we are interpreting evidence only in ways that confirm one's belief, right? So, so if you see, if you're presented with evidence that something that you believe to be true does not exist. So let's say, you believe that UFOs piloted by extraterrestrials from outer space crashed in Roswell, New Mexico, and the government hid this story, and they have stored those UFOs in Area 51 in, I guess it's in Nevada. This is an actual conspiracy theory. If you haven't ever heard this before, I'm not having, some kind of episode. But so some people do actually believe this conspiracy theory. Now, if when faced with evidence that would disprove the theory, okay, somebody with confirmation bias might say, well, this only proves that the government is controlling our information and hiding the truth, right? That's confirmation bias. When you're so committed to your belief that you see any evidence that counters your belief as actually only further proof that what you believe is true. And this is common with conspiracy theories where, if I show you evidence that your conspiracy theory is wrong, that just increases, the person's paranoia that they're being manipulated by people in higher power. Okay, so the halo effect would be, was the second one. When an opinion you have of one aspect, part of something, someone determines how you feel about the whole. Okay, so, they give an example of, politicians, because I think this is the most common example of this idea of the halo effect. And it even applies to political parties. In ways that, I think are sometimes even more damaging to, our national conversation, where say a political party appeals to you because there's one stance that's associated with that party that is really important to you. Okay. So you think, okay, well, because I have X belief and this belief is really important to me, therefore I must be a Republican, or therefore I must be a Democrat. But then because they hold that one belief, you feel compelled to adopt or defend other beliefs that party holds. Okay, so so somebody might be a Republican or Democrat because of how they feel about government spending. Okay, but because of where they stand, they might feel compelled to adopt other views of that party and to defend other views of that party that they might not necessarily hold or feel strongly about. All right. And so it can happen with a politician. You have a politician you like because of one thing the politician says. And so now you feel the need to defend everything that politician says or every stance that politician takes. Okay, so this is called the halo effect. Okay, so the idea that this one aspect sort of creates this halo around the entire thing that you feel compelled to either defend or you feel compelled to hate. Okay, it works the other way too. There could be one reason why you hate Democrats or one reason why you hate Republicans. But because of that reason, you find yourself having to reject or hate other things that you might ordinarily agree with or not have a problem with. Assuming a single cause, not acknowledging that phenomena often have multiple complex causes, or mistaking association with causation. And so one of the examples from the chapter, basically talks about gluten. And so a study showing that gluten is associated with, like 55 different medical conditions, okay? Or gluten consumption is associated with, these different medical conditions, but that doesn't necessarily mean gluten consumption causes those medical conditions, right? It's like, it's like if I say that, being a student is associated with dropping books. Okay, because students are more likely to be carrying books, so therefore they're more likely to be dropping books. So I'm sure if I did a study of all the people who are dropping books in the world and how frequently they are dropping books, I would probably find that students are dropping books more frequently than everyone else. Okay, and I am going somewhere with this. So there's an association with students and dropping books that I could find, but that doesn't necessarily mean being a student causes you to drop books. Okay. So, if you think of it that way, that's kind of absurd. But it's the same idea here where, just because, something is associated with a certain condition, or a certain phenomenon, it doesn't necessarily mean it causes it. Okay. It doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't cause it, but it could be that it's one cause, or it could be an indirect cause, like in the case of students and books, of what's happening. So the influence of repetition. So 3 more of these, and then we're done. The influence of repetition, when an image or depiction sticks in our minds because we see it repeatedly. Of course, this is this is how advertisers work. This is how political campaigns work. They tell you the same thing over and over and over and over and over again until you start to believe it. All right. We have a certain association, certain belief, just simply because we've heard it over and over again, not necessarily because we have any direct experience or I've done any real thinking or study of whatever our belief is. And then 2 more that are easy to get mixed up or confused for each other. Base rate neglect, assuming that a research sample is adequate when one needs a larger sample. All right. So we're talking about sample size here. All right. So, so if I, if I pull 2 students out of class and I say, and ask each student how often they drop books, and one student says, I drop my books every single day. Okay. Then, if I then make the conclusion that, roughly 50% of students are dropping their books on a day-to-day basis, then, that's not, a warranted conclusion based on my sample size. I just pulled 2 students and one of them is obviously a klutz. So, I would need a much larger sample size before I can determine with any real certainty whether there's actually a pattern. And there are people, if you ever take a class on statistics, statistics is both, incredibly fascinating and incredibly tedious. as a subject. That was a recommendation to take the class. It's because I think it's important, but it can be, it can be a difficult class, but so much of our life is, and so much of what we're taught and told, and in terms of how to act, what to do, how to eat, is all based on statistics. In a lot of ways, statistics really kind of run the world, and having some idea of how they're developed and how they work and what they mean. I found it, when I took a statistics class, to be, very eye-opening. So base rate neglect, we're talking about sample size statistics. So a little different from the last one, settling for what is immediately available. So in this case, we're relying on whatever information is the easiest to access. Okay. So, this would be, like I need to do a report. And so I Google my topic, and, whatever the first source is that comes up, that's the source I use for my information. Right. So that's settling for what is immediately available. So, so I'm not trying to do in-depth research or compare sources or compare information. I'm just sort of taking, the first thing I see, right? Or if I really want to if I really want to learn about what's happening in the world, and so I just turn on, the TV and, like listen to one news channel and use that to determine my entire, belief system about what's happening in the world, as opposed to maybe trying to dig and do a little more research, try to get a better understanding. So we're not talking about sample size here. We're really talking about, the extent to which you're, trying to understand a subject by looking at it from different sources, looking at different research, being willing to be a little more strategic in how you dig and look for information. Okay, so those are the biases that you might bring to your research. And it's important to consider these because they can sort of affect the quality of your thinking. And when you're doing research, whether it be for school or for a job, or just for for political reasons, you want to learn about an issue. These are things that you should be aware of. These are tendencies that you may have, that we all have, that you should try to counteract if you really want a more accurate representation of whatever it is you're learning about. Okay, so that's it for this video. Thank you, and have a great day.